My name is Jerry Cummins, and I want to tell you that the main speaker tonight, as you know, is Landrum Bolling, and also tonight we have Ambassador Philip Wilcox, only I call him Phil. I get to call him Phil because Phil and I graduated from high school in Denver, Colorado, several years ago. I think it was in about the 70s.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe 20 years old.
And Landrum is going to be talking about. I'm going to introduce Phil, and Phil's going to introduce Mr. Bolling, and Mr. Bolling, of course, is going to talk about ending the Palestinian conflict. That, in fact, is the title of his book. Yeah, ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Arab-Jewish partnerships. And since the introduction or foreword to the book is written by Phil Wilcox, he went on for public service in the State Department for 31 years. His last overseas assignment was as Chief of Mission and U.S. Consul General in Jerusalem. Among his assignments in the Department of State were Ambassador at Large and Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Middle Eastern Affairs, and Director for Israeli and Arab Israeli Affairs. And when he retired a number of years ago after serving 31 years, he then served as the President of the Foundation for Middle East Peace here in Washington, D.C. I'm very appreciative for Phil coming, and I'll turn the program over to him.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, I did spend a time doing what I thought was the right way to do counterterrorism. I retired from the State Department before 9/11. Happily, since then, I think our country has gone haywire over terrorism. But that's another issue. I'm delighted to be here with an old friend and one of my early mentors, Landrum Bolling. Landrum is, I think, a preeminent expert on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He has devoted decades to studying and working on this problem, and he knows many of the principal actors, people like Yasser Arafat, Jimmy Carter, Yitzhak Rabin, and a whole cast of people who have been deeply involved. As I have noticed over the years that people develop a passion and enthusiasm and a commitment to this issue, but many of them drop out because it's so discouraging. And they had expected an early solution. Not Landrum. He's been with it now for 50 years. Before he got involved in the Middle East, at an early age he was a correspondent with UPI, with the partisans in Yugoslavia. He was a professor at Brown University. He, for many years, was the president of Earlham College, that famous institution in Richmond, Indiana. He was the president of the Eli Lilly Foundation. He has served on an untold number of boards as a leader and as a voice for civilization, for human rights, and for progress. He's a man of strong conscience, and he's been a powerful advocate for a decent peace between Israelis and Palestinians. So it's my honor to be here tonight and to be able to introduce Landrum. I know that during the last 6 weeks, all of us have been shocked by what we have seen in Gaza on the television screens. It is doubly shocking because this horror comes almost 65 66 years after the establishment of the State of Israel. And this long conflict between these two societies has escaped a resolution by the parties themselves, much less by the rest of the world. And I think it's an indictment on the family of nations that they have failed collectively to do what the Israelis and Palestinians have been unable to do themselves to make a decent peace. So that's the subject of Landrum's talk today. There are many different views about how this can be done, but I think there's a growing view that it's impossible, that somehow these two societies are doomed to confront each other and to suffer periodic violence, and that the future is very dark for them both. I don't believe that. I think that it is a soluble problem. I cling to the view that the best solution is to divide the land and create two states, but there is a growing body of opinion that believes that that is no longer feasible, that it's simply too late. I'm sure Landrum, among other things, will reflect on that question. So, Landrum, I'm delighted to, an honor to be here to introduce you and to once again hear your thoughts on this, one of the great issues of our time.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. In November, I celebrated, with the help of a few hundred people, my 100th birthday. I often say my hearing is fading, my eyesight is deteriorating, I am suffering the disabilities of very old age. But I thank God every day that I wake up. I enjoy life, I enjoy my friends, and I intend to keep on enjoying this life as long as I possibly can. So I'm glad to be here on this occasion, and glad to share ideas with you about this fascinating and endlessly demanding issue of peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. And it's very clear, I think, from any of you, if you've read anything that I've written or heard me speak, that I do not give up. I do not believe that the conflict is impossible to deal with. I am convinced that there is a possibility for finding a way to deal with it, and the solution that seems to me that makes the more sense than anything else is one that brings the two people together. Basically, there are two approaches to peace in the Middle East. One I would call the separationist approach, and the other the collaborationist approach. The separationist approach holds the view that these two people are so different, so hostile, the best thing that you can do to avoid conflict is to keep them as far apart as you can. And that particular thinking is activating the Israeli government in some respects. They have created, as you know, I think it's not quite finished, but they're building a 400-mile separation barrier costing more than $2 billion, running through the heart of the Holy Land to separate Jews from Arabs. This is supposed to be a formula for peace. It's not a formula for peace, it's maybe a formula for stagnation of a conflict, but it is not a solution for the conflict itself. I believe that, just to put my views on the line, I believe that the issue can be resolved, but it has to be resolved on the basis of a kind of partnership between the two peoples. You know, in the very early days of the Zionist movement, two of the intellectual champions of creating in the Holy Land is something special. were two extraordinary American intellectuals. One was Judah Magnus, a distinguished rabbi in New York, who migrated to Israel and was the founder and the first president of Hebrew University. The other was Martin Buber, the famous theologian, philosopher, Vienna-born, I believe, who was a tremendous spokesman for peace. Well, these two men were close friends, and during their early years in the Holy Land, they came to the conclusion that the only way you would eventually have peace would be to have one state with equal citizenship rights for all the people who live there, regardless of race, religion, ethnic background, or political affiliation. And this was a very strong view of these two early intellectuals. They tried to sell this idea of having a kind of federated state instead of a purely Jewish state. They were not able to sell it to fellow Zionists and to fellow early settlers in Israel. But to this day, I think that idea, in some form or other, has to be examined. This country, the Holy Land, belongs to Jews and it belongs to Arabs. Arabs and Jews belong to that land. There's no way you're going to separate them. They are both fated to live in perpetuity, side by side. How can they live there in peace? That's the big issue. And I believe it's possible, because I believe on both sides there are people of goodwill, people of commitment to working for peace. And over the years that I've been going back and forth to Israel, but I lived there for a few years at one time when I was head of the Tantur Ecumenical Institute just outside of Jerusalem. I'm convinced that these two people can find a way to work together. And I think that we ought to give all possible support to efforts made to bring them together. Now, as I look out across the period of history through which we've been living, I realize how challenging, how difficult it is to see real hope for a solution to this problem. But I believe that it's absolutely essential that people of goodwill, people of religious faith, whether Jews or Christian or Muslim, should hold to that vision that somehow, in time, we can find ways of all working and living peacefully together. I don't give up that hope. I believe that's there as a reality. And I won't do all that I can, as long as I live, to support that idea that these two people belong to each other, they belong to this land, and they can together make it a place of peace and prosperity and goodwill. And I ask all of us to do whatever we can to support that faith, that hope, and that can happen. Now, I think that I'm supposed to just sort of throw the airwaves open and ask you to come forward with any questions you may want to put forward or any statements you would like to make on this occasion. So, if you would, somebody hold up a hand and ask a question, and
I'm going to give you a mic.
Wilcox will repeat it to me, and I'll talk about it.
And I'm wondering to what extent you see awareness of the Golden Rule as something that both Israelis and Palestinians honor and might find a way to adhere to.
I think it's just a terribly important thing to keep alive this belief that it is possible for these people to live and work together. Let me just tell you about one of my dearest Israeli Jewish friends, who is a tremendous inspiration to me and helped to educate me like few people have. one of the most interesting and impressive human beings I've ever known was a retired Israeli general named Matti Peled, P-E-L-E-D. Matti Peled lied about his age and got into the military, I think, at the age of 15. He worked his way up through the military and became the #2 general in the Israeli Defense Forces. He was a logistics genius. He largely planned the fantastic, successful Six-Day War. And when the war was over, General Peled quit the military cold, and he took his family and moved to Southern California, where he enrolled in a graduate study at UCLA and got a doctor's degree in Arabic language and literature. A general, an Israeli. And he went back from that educational experience with his fresh PhD degree, took up a job as a teacher of Arab culture in Tel Aviv University, ran for Knesset as a dove and was elected. Matti Peled believed that it was possible for Jews and Arabs to live together, and he worked very hard to prove it. He was an inspiration to me like few people I've ever known. He exemplified this faith, this hope, this determination. And interestingly enough, that is still part of his family. His family are very active in an organization sometimes called the Bereaved Families for Peace. This is made up of men and women who are fathers, mothers, and close relatives of people who have been killed by the violence from the other side, but who, in spite of that, have banded together to share their experiences, their pain, their suffering, and their joint determination not to be swallowed up by hatred and desire for revenge, but instead to work for reconciliation. I asked him, what do you people do? I asked him General Peled's son-in-law, who's very active, a man named Arlington. So I said, Rami, what do you people who are working on this do? He said, well, mainly we make speeches. We go around and talk to high schools, Palestinian and Israeli high schools, and to other public audiences, wherever we can get an audience. We want to get across the idea that revenge gets us nowhere. We want to get across the idea that reconciliation is possible and that we should work for reconciliation. Well, these are real, honest-to-goodness Israeli Jews who have these views and are working on it. And I want to publicize those people and have the world understand that on both sides, among Arabs and Israelis, there are people of peace, people of courage, people of vision, who will not give in to the pressures for revenge and for hatred and for trying to keep this conflict going.
May I ask a related question? Has there been any history over the last 50 years or so of any attempt by Palestinians to adopt the approach of Mahatma Gandhi in India of nonviolent resistance?
Called people, there are many different kinds of Jews, many different kinds of Palestinians. But there are Palestinians and there are Israelis who are committed to peace. And I've made a job of trying to get acquainted with some of these people who are working for peace. Let me just tell you about a few of them. Halfway along the road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, within sight of the one of the old monasteries, is a joint Arab Jewish kibbutz called Oasis of Peace. There are about 40 families, half Jewish and half Arabs, who have been living together in a kibbutz for more than 25 years. They are now about to expand their membership to something like 60. it's not a spectacular thing, but here they have a group of people who have decided to live together, to work together. The main income they derive is from operating a kind of guest house hotel jointly. And they have a school in which the children are taught in both Hebrew and Arabic. Now, one would say it's a modest experiment. It's not a big enterprise, but it is a symbol of the desire and the commitment of some Jews and some Arabs to work together and to find peace. And I see a number of illustrations of that. For example, one of the things that's been very interesting in the recent years has been a joint young Jewish, young Arab orchestra, which was sponsored largely by Edward Said, a distinguished scholar at Columbia University, and his partner, Birnbaum, who is one of the very distinguished musical conductors, who is a guest conductor for opera houses and symphony orchestras all over the world. Now, these two men had a vision that it would be possible to build a youth orchestra made up of both Jews and Arabs, train them to a virtually professional level, and send them out to give concerts across Europe and America. Well, that's a small enterprise, I suppose, but it's an example of what can be done with people who have imagination and vision and courage.
I was wondering what type of advice you would give a group like us, how we can have any impact on the results, because I think we all favor an integrated, democratic Palestine, Israel. But our government seems to support the other side, I mean the Jewish side. Even recently, more money for Israel. We've been giving $3 billion a year, and now it's even more. So how can we, is that a good use of our money? And if not, how do we stop it?
Well, that is a very, very important question. I tell you, it's a question that ought to engage the best thinking of every one of us in this room. And whatever influence we have in dealing with our congressmen, in dealing with our government, in the State Department or wherever, we need to get across that message that we cannot hope to have peace by one-sided favoring of giving Israel everything it wants and not holding them accountable for things that they're doing that are making peace impossible.
What are your specific prescriptions to effect peace on the ground? What step-by-steps would you take to actually make peace?
Let me tell you one thing I would do. I don't know what the progression should be. I can't tell you what is step 1 and step 2 and step 3. But I'm convinced that one of the important steps is to find ways to get Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs together on common ventures, common activities. And I think a great deal can be done in bringing the two people together and in bringing the particularly young people together. I think that the limitation is in our imagination. The limitation is in our vision of what can be done. And I think we are called upon, wherever we are, whatever our church affiliation may or may not be, how can we find ways to foster these cooperative endeavors?
What model might be implemented and what body might have standing to actually do a just peace negotiation project that is more comprehensive than the United States going it alone?
Very good question. I think inevitably the United States is a key actor in any serious effort at peacemaking. We have more potential influence over Israel than any other political entity in the world. And we don't always use that influence very creatively, but we have that possibility, and we ought to be more attentive to what we can do to encourage constructive actions by the Israelis.
Good evening, sir. I wondered if you could tell me, because I've never heard this, what the approximate wealth of each of these two countries are. How much economic aid are they getting, and from who?
The Israelis have a very vigorous economy, and it's doing well. And they I think one can argue that they don't need to get all the kind of financial aid from Israel that we give them. That we're doing more than we need to do. But that is an argument, you know. Aid to Israel is a very popular issue in the Congress. Anybody who stands up and wants to reduce aid, physical aid, financial aid to Israel is going to have a hard time in the Congress. That's just the way things are.
If I might add to what Landrum said, the United States provides about $3 billion a year to Israel, and vastly more than it gives to any other country. The per capita income of Israelis is almost comparable to that of the United Kingdom. It is far higher than the per capita income of people, for example, in the state of Montana.
You know, one of the bizarre things is that the so-called Truman doctrine, the so-called financial aid to developing countries, was going to provide money for underdeveloped countries, what somebody sometimes are unfairly calling underdeveloped or backward countries. We were going to help these slow developing countries. But out of the money that was appropriated to help the developing countries, Israel got a bigger share than anybody.
I saw an article in Haaretz, a Jewish newspaper today, that said that somebody calculated that beginning with the Truman Doctrine, a total of $400 billion has been given to Israel.
Our aid to the Palestinians is very significant. It's very important to have some aid going to them, but it's not anything like on the scale of our aid to Israel.
The situation, it seems to me, is that there's such a disparity in power between the Palestinians, who are under occupation by Israel, and Israel is a superpower of the Middle East and receives unchecked support from the United States, regardless of its actions, even with this recent massacre in Gaza. I think the most we've heard is that maybe they're suspending delivery of the missiles. But let's see how long that lasts. So the question is, how can we, will Israel ever agree to a just peace if there's not an incentive? If they can continue to grow the settlements, what will induce them to agree to a just peace? Well, one solution, which the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker organization that you've been associated with in the past, Jewish Voice for Peace, believe one way of trying to change the balance of power is boycotting products that are made in the settlements, which are settlements are illegal under international law, or divesting from corporations that are profiting and supporting the occupation. Now, this has taken on in Europe quite significant
so much so that the Israeli Minister of Finance expressed his concern, and I believe Netanyahu, when he was at the AIPAC conference, spent a good deal of time talking about BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction. So this is one way individuals and groups can take action that our Congress is unwilling to take. And I know you've had mixed feelings about boycott, divestment, and sanctions, but I don't know if you've thought further about that. And we certainly appreciate all the work you've done in this field. Thank you.
Nobody has asked or made any comment about the so-called two-state solution as a way to get peace. I argued in favor of a two-state solution, but after a while I became convinced it was a dead idea. It's never going to happen because the Israelis have made it impossible. If you take it into account that the Israelis have been gobbling up West Bank lands from the Arabs, the very land that would be the heart of an Arab state if there was to be an Arab state. You can't have an Arab state in the West Bank the way the Israelis have grabbed land and set up settlements. You've got hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews who've been moved from Israel proper into the Arab West Bank. And you're expected you're going to have an Arab state there? This is absurd on the very face of it. So the idea of a two-state solution might have worked if people had been honest and serious about it. But there's no possibility of a two-state solution with the way in which the Israelis have gobbled up the land.
In 2005, we were in Istanbul at a concert given by the Turkish-Israeli Friendship Group at the Old Palace, and Pinchas Zuckerman and some younger musicians were there. And I know that Turkey is not an Arab country, but it's one of the leaders of the Muslim world. And it's one of the strongest Muslim countries right now, and probably the most stable one, a big one that's in the Mideast. But then a few years after that, there was a Turkish ship attacked by Israelis, and they were taking food and cement into Gaza, and they were attacked, and several Turks were killed, and this turned Turkey against Israel in a big way. The public relations were very bad, and I just thought, well, they won't even let them have cement. They need cement to build their houses. But now, after this conflict comes out, these photographs come of these tunnels that are lined with cement, and some cement is a war stuff, or it's a war type provision for the people in Gaza. And so it's a very complex situation. I think both sides have been taken over by warmongers. The Israelis have their right wing, and then Hamas is so influential with the Palestinians. And I don't see that there's any hope anytime soon of changing that.
I'm sure that I don't have an answer to that question. How do you get rid of people, political leaders, who want to depend upon force as a way to achieve almost anything? There is, I think, a growing public awareness of the fact that there are limitations to what you can accomplish simply by using force. The only way that we can ever hope to begin to build peace is to get to know each other. Many years ago, I set out at the request of the Quakers to get acquainted with a variety of Israeli Jews and of Palestinian Arabs and of Arabs in other countries. And I remember I went to see a Jewish scientist who was the director of the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot in Israel. And I told him about my mission from the Quakers to try to see if there's anything that could be done to encourage peaceful cooperation. And he said, well, I want you to understand where we are. We don't trust each other. And how would we expected to trust each other? We don't know each other. And this man went on to me. He said, I'd like to give an idea to you Quakers. Why don't you organize discussion groups to bring Israelis and Palestinians together? Not to talk about politics, but get water engineers to meet with water engineers from the other side. Get physical rehab people who are Jews meet with physical rehab people who are Arabs. And so I've never forgotten that conversation. And over again, it comes back to me. What can we do to encourage people to have simple, personal, human contact and get acquainted with one another? That's essential. That's essential.
I'm not sure if I am the only Israeli Jew here, but next to me there is a prominent Palestinian lawyer. So, you know each other.
Yeah, you know.
And I've been trying to help Landrum to help us over the years. I just wanted to add to his preoccupation about the two-state solution versus the one-state solution, that there is a think tank of Israelis and Palestinians in Jerusalem that is now advocating two states in one country, which means, taking from the example of the Benelux, the beginning of the European Union, this group, IPRI, you know, feel IPRI very well, this group has been suggesting a similar situation where Palestinians are going to vote in their state, Israelis are going to vote in their state, but there will be a free flow of merchandise, work, and also residence. So Palestinians could reside in Israel, and Israelis could reside in Palestine, but the voting at this first stage, as now we have a European Parliament, maybe there will be a pan-Middle Eastern Parliament. But the first stage, because no trust, two states, but free flow of everything, including friendship.
I'd just like to say a word more about my once very close friend, now unfortunately for several years departed, General Matty Pellet, one of the most remarkable men I ever knew in my life, and one of the most remarkable families that I ever knew. General Pellet's granddaughter, Sundar, 13 years old, was blown up by a Palestinian suicide bomber on one of the main busy streets in the downtown area of Jerusalem. Terrible thing to happen. What was the response of the family? Well, I tell you one thing, because the family was so prominent, because General Pellet was one of the great military heroes of Israel, and the Prime Minister, I think Netanyahu and other people, came to call on the family to express condolences for the loss of this daughter. And you know the reaction that the family gave them? They were polite, I assume, but they said in effect, look, and Nurit Pellet told me this story. She said to them, I hold you Israeli officials responsible for the death of my daughter. She was killed because of your stupid occupation policies. You people are war criminals yourselves.
So I guess my question to you and to Ambassador Wilcox is, where are the voices? I mean, we hear some here, but are there Israeli and Palestinian political leaders who are speaking out for what is called the one-state solution? I can see a shift in the U.S. in the lead opinion, but is there a shift? Are there Israelis willing to stand up and advocate this position, and Palestinians willing to stand up and advocate this position?
That's a very good question. You know, one of my most recent visits to Israel, I spent a day down in Tel Aviv, mainly going around talking to Israeli friends of mine about one question. I ask over and over again, do you think there will be a one state, or will there always be two states, and will the two states get along? What is your view? Is there going to be, is the possibility there's going to be one state? Every single person, every single Israeli I talked to said yes, there will be eventually one state. All of them said it'll take time. The most optimistic said it'll take at least 25 years till we come to the point where we'll have one state. Some said, no, it's going to be 50 years. One person said, no, it'll be 100 years. But eventually, we will have one state.
I believe that's true as well. Whether it is possible to achieve one state through a political process beginning now, or is one state something that will be achieved after an intermediary process of creating two states, which would then realize that they are dependent upon each other and would quickly find ways to cooperate in a mutually profitable way than they ever have in the past. That has not been answered adequately, but there are a variety of different formulations for achieving two societies living together, cooperating in complete equality. No one has yet come up with a way of breaking the current impasse, short of the mobilization of much greater will and influence, and yes, political power by the international community, because those are two very small states. They are not immune to influence and persuasion from the outside world. That kind of persuasion has been lacking, and indeed the state of Israel for years has been indulged in reckless, dangerous, and self-destructive policies, not to mention the cost to the Palestinians, because their chief friend and benefactor in the United States has not said you can't do that. And therefore they have developed a sense of impunity. And I think that lies at the heart of the problem.
Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. Phil and I are both scholars at the Middle East Institute, and some years ago at the 60th anniversary, we were asked a series of questions. One of them is, do you think in the next 60 years there will be a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli problem? I was told I was the only one who said yes. Maybe Phil did too. But I did so basis on the grounds of the Israeli conscience. It's said that the Israelis have a choice of two of three things. They can keep the land, they can be a Jewish state, and they can remain a democracy, but they can't have all three. And the two-state solution assumes they give up the land. The one-state solution assumes they give up one of the others. And I don't see a movement to them becoming, giving up being a Jewish state. And I do see a lot of progress. Progress, that's not the right word. I also see steps that they are not becoming, should we say, a democracy that enjoys equality. And I think come to mind when I was involved in the peace process. And I had a conversation with an advisor to then the Prime Minister, and this advisor told me, well, there's a very simple solution to this problem. We just have two definitions of sovereignty, one for the Israelis and one for the Palestinians. I guess I fear that a one-state solution will be an apartheid state, or at least have two definitions of equality, and maybe over a long period of time, the Israeli conscience, the Israeli conscience will be pricked severely, that will be ameliorated.
If Israel is to be carry out its policies, it will be as an apartheid state. It will, some people are saying it's already an apartheid state. They have Jews-only roads, for example. There's a whole network of roads built in the West Bank that Arabs are forbidden to travel on. That's apartheid. What else is it? And so this is a hot issue among Israelis. And some, for instance, when this, Jimmy Carter wrote a book that was itself, the book itself was not controversial, but the title was controversial. It was called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. And some people thought Jimmy Carter was accusing Israel of being an apartheid state or whatever. Anyway, that term is bandied about a good deal, and for example, some people saying in defense of Israel, well, this is just another form of anti-Semitism, calling Israel an apartheid state. But then one of the former Israeli attorney generals, a lawyer, wrote an article published in an Israeli newspaper in which he said, we have developed an apartheid system of jurisdiction, one fair and just for Israelis, and one discriminatory applied to Palestinians. This was written by an Israeli lawyer. Then one of the intellectual women professors wrote an article in the newspaper, and she said, we have created an apartheid state. We've given to our military the power to create an apartheid system. So you inside Israel. One of the things that I'd like to remind myself of, and I remind you of, is Israel is one of the great things about Israel. It is one of the freest, most open societies on earth. You have newspapers that print articles every day critical of Israel in ways I've said many times. You will find in the newspaper Haaretz, an Israeli liberal-leaning newspaper, you will find stories there that you would never see printed in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, or the New York Times.
Phil, did you want to end up with saying anything, or do you think that's it?
Well, I think Landrum has framed the issue very well. Do the Israeli and the Palestinians suffer another 50 years of terrible violence and mayhem, which would only prolong the tragedy that has existed now for many years? Or is there a better way to do this? Can we dismiss, based upon experience, the failure of a diplomatic process to create two states? Or do we try to mobilize a diplomatic process that is more honest and serious and sustained? Landrum has pointed out the qualities of these two societies. Many, many brilliant, capable people of goodwill and good sense. The Palestinians are the best educated society in the Middle East. They have almost the same percentage of PhDs in their community as the Israelis do. The problem lies, I think, in the dysfunctional politics in both countries and in the failure of the external world to use its influence in a more resolute and effective way. And I regret it. I've served the U.S. government for many, many years, but I think our government, frankly, has failed. And I think we do have the capacity as a nation to deal with this problem much more honestly and forthrightly and effectively. And if we gave it a better try, I think we'd find a very good response from both the Israelis and the Palestinians, and I think one of the most enthusiastic communities of all, if we did it right, would be the American Jewish community.
Yeah, I once had a talk with a very distinguished Arab political leader, and I said, do you have any sense of optimism or pessimism about the future of the relations between Jews and Arabs, and Palestinians and Israelis? What do you see happening? And this eminent Arab diplomat said to me, I will not live to see the peaceful resolution of this dispute, but I have no doubt whatsoever that down the road, within a definite number of years, Arabs and Jews will come to the conclusion we belong to each other. Peace can only come because we both want it and work for it together. And that can happen, and that sooner or later will happen. I believe that, and we have to keep working for it.
Let's add